Julian, I love the philosophy of religion. Many of my friends are philosophers of religion. But some of my other friends who believe in God tell me I'm totally wasting my time, that philosophy of religion has nothing to do with real belief in God.
Well, I think there could be something you said for that. I mean, also very diverse. And, if you look at what's done under the name of philosophy of religion, it varies a lot. I think it has a real image problem because the way it's taught in schools and in undergraduate courses, there's a lot of focus on these, scholastic arguments for the existence of God, as though, the main purpose of philosophy of religion is to try and see whether or not one can prove God's existence. I think that is pointless.
These arguments, the design argument, the cosmological argument, first cause, or the so-called ontological argument that God is the greatest being that you can imagine, and can you prove anything from that? I think those are interesting ways of thinking, but nobody thinks they will actually prove or disprove God.
Well, exactly. I think that's the point. Virtually no one believes on the basis of these things at all. So they're just not what really motivates a religion. And yet we spend all this time teaching these arguments to people as though they were critical. I think it was completely the wrong idea about what religion is. Now, philosophy of religion at its best is surely going to help us to understand better what religion is, the structure of its justifications and beliefs and so forth. Now, if you want to do that, I think there are other much, much more interesting issues. For example, issues around language. What does it really mean to say the water is turned into wine? Because no one believes what it means is that you take that wine and you take it to the laboratory and you find hemoglobin in it, right? No one believes that. No one believes... So what does it mean? And there are lots of interesting arguments around that. And also about the role of practice and belief. What are those things? People get very fixated on the creed, the doctrine, there are reasons to take that seriously, right? People recite it as part of the liturgy, and so obviously we should take it seriously. But if you actually look at the religious life, a lot more of it is to do with community and practice and ethics and so forth. So how do all these things fit together? I think there are really interesting philosophical questions there. And unfortunately, I think they're neglected because people like things where there's a little argument you can construct and you can show premise one is false, conclusion two doesn't follow, and so forth.
Well, if we look at the study of religion, which everybody, I think, thinks is valid, and there are different categories. We have the sociology of religion, how it developed, the psychology of religion, how individuals relate to religious experience and all of those things. Philosophy of religion seeks to get into an analytical approach in general to the aspects of religion. One category certainly is arguments. I think it teaches you a way of thinking, and hopefully it teaches you that you can't rely on that, but I think it's an important process in the history of religious belief, because for a long time people did.
Well, I think one of the problems perhaps then with philosophy of religion is precisely that there is philosophy of religion, and that is separate from sociology of religion, psychology of religion. There is a real damage done by this compartmentalization of academic disciplines, because really, you can't understand the justification of religious belief in a purely philosophical terms and just ignore psychology, sociology, anthropology.
That's a good point.
These things have to come together. So I think that philosophy of religion suffers from being isolated by these other things, as the philosophy of many things does. Ethics, a study of ethics, suffered a lot when it was completely devoid of any empirical content around psychology and so forth. It's changing now. And philosophy of science is changing as well. Philosophers of science now really know their science. They're not just looking at it from the outside. So I think there has to be more of a bringing together of these different disciplines if they have any benefit, really.
Some philosophers of religion make the assumption that God exists and then try to discern God's characteristics, which are complementary, which are contradictory. God's all the omnis, all powerful, all good, all knowing, all free, everlasting or eternal, and to see these different characteristics. And they would hope to get a deeper understanding of God by these analytical techniques. If you believed in God, do you think the philosophy of religion could help you understand God?
Well, what you've called philosophy of religion there sounds to me like theology. To me, if you start with the assumption of God, that God exists, and then you're about exploring the contradictions and the consistencies, I think that's theology, not philosophy of religion. Philosophy of religion has to start with, if you like, a blank slate. It has to start with as few assumptions as possible. So, I don't think that really is properly philosophy of religion. Leave that to the theology departments.
Yeah, actually, it is done in philosophy of religion, because I think the difference between theology and philosophy of religion is the methodology. So the methodology of analytical techniques is generally not done in theology. Theology, they deal with rituals and creedal kinds of things. But in terms of trying to discern the difference, in fact, I'm actually surprised sometimes at some quite eminent theologians who really don't even know what the issues are in the philosophy of the religion for those who assume that God exists. And so you could, very well-known theologians, you give some of these problems, they really don't even know how to deal with it.
Well, I think if you look at the difference between theology and philosophy of religion, perhaps there are deep differences and there are sociological differences. Now, I think there is a deep difference. One can distinguish the study of theology and philosophy of religion by saying that one starts with an assumption of belief or faith and then seeks to explore it rationally. The other doesn't. That, I think, is a deep distinction. The sociological distinction may be that, as a matter of fact, in philosophy of religion, people use these analytic methods, and in theology, they don't. But actually, I think that shouldn't be the way these things are divided. Really, people should avail themselves of whatever methods are important. And so theologians should use perhaps a bit more analytical thinking. And philosophers of religion should also draw more on things like psychology and sociology to really understand what's going on.